The wine glass slipped in my hand the moment my dad said it. Not all the way, I caught it, but the wine sloshed close to the edge, and a few dark drops landed on the white tablecloth like little bruises. Nobody noticed. Or maybe they just didn't care. "You're not in the will anymore, Emma." That was it. No warning. No soft lead-up. Just words dropped in the middle of dinner like they meant nothing. Like he was commenting on the weather outside or asking someone to pass the salt. I set the glass down slowly. The room didn't react right away. My mom, Linda, just kept cutting her steak, knife against plate. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Like she hadn't just sat there while her own daughter got erased from the family in one sentence. My brother Jason leaned back in his chair, calm, almost relaxed. His arms crossed over his chest, and there was something in his face that I didn't fully understand yet. Not surprise, not discomfort, almost like relief. Like he'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. I laughed first, a short, confused sound, because surely this was a joke. One of those uncomfortable family jokes that goes too far, and then someone says, "Gotcha," and we all move on. "Wait." I looked at my dad. "What?" Dad sighed, long and slow, like I was the one making things difficult, like I was the problem sitting at this table. "We've decided everything will go to Jason," he said. "He's more responsible." More responsible. I let those two words sit in my ears for a second. More responsible. I thought about the 2 jobs I worked all through college, the student loans I paid back on my own, the apartment I built from scratch with no help from anyone at this table, the promotions I earned, the life I put together piece by piece with my own 2 hands. More responsible. Jason smirked from across the table. That easy, comfortable smirk he'd worn his whole life. The one that said the world was built for him and he knew it. "It's just practical, Em," he said. "You've always been unstable." Unstable. My chest tightened. I looked around the table. My aunt was staring at her plate. My cousin was suddenly very interested in her bread roll. The family friend who always came to these dinners was looking somewhere past my shoulder at the wall. Nobody stepped in. Not one person. I waited. I actually waited. Because I genuinely believed that someone, anyone, would say something, would push back, would at least look uncomfortable enough to make me feel like I wasn't invisible. But the silence just stretched. "Are you serious?" My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. It cracked at the edges. "I'm your daughter." Mom finally looked up from her plate. Her eyes were steady. Not warm, not guilty, just steady. "And we've done enough for you," she said. That was it. That was the whole sentence. Done enough. Something inside me dropped in that moment, not broke. I want to be clear about that. It didn't shatter the way you'd think. It was more like something that had been held loosely for a very long time, just let go. Like it had never been gripped tightly enough to begin with. I stood up too fast. My chair scraped loud and sharp across the hardwood floor, and the sound cut through the room like something cracking. "Enough?" My voice was louder now. I couldn't help it. "You mean like the money you spent on Jason's failed businesses? The debts you quietly paid off for him? That kind of enough?" Something flickered across Jason's face. The smirk faded, just for a second. Dad's voice dropped low. Hard. The voice he used when he wanted to shut things down without raising his own volume. "Sit down, Emma." No. That one word filled the room. I stood there, hands shaking, purse half grabbed, heart pounding so loud I could feel it in my throat. The silence was thick, heavy, the kind you can almost touch. I looked at my mom one more time. I don't know what I was hoping to see. Some flicker, some apology living behind her eyes. Nothing. I picked up my purse, fingers unsteady, movements stiff. "You know what?" I said quietly. "Keep it. Keep all of it." I turned toward the door. And that's when Jason said it. His voice was low, almost casual, like he was just making an observation. "Don't act surprised, Emma. You were never the favorite." I didn't turn around, I just walked out. The cold air outside hit my face and my lungs filled with it like I had been underwater this whole time and just broke the surface. My heels clicked down the front path. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't look at the warm light spilling from the dining room window. I just kept walking. And that line followed me the whole way. You were never the favorite. If you've ever sat at a table full of people and still felt completely alone, you already know how that feels. You already know that specific kind of quiet that settles inside you when the people who were supposed to choose you don't. But what I didn't know that night, walking to my car with shaking hands and dry eyes, was that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. And I was about to find out exactly why. I didn't cry right away. That's the part that scared me most. I sat in my car outside their house for a few minutes, just sitting, engine off, hands still on the steering wheel even though I wasn't driving anywhere. The leather felt cold under my palms. My hands were shaking, but my eyes were completely dry, like my body hadn't caught up to what just happened yet. Like some part of me was still back at that table, waiting for someone to laugh and say it was all a misunderstanding. The porch light behind me flicked off, that small thing, that tiny, ordinary thing. Nobody came out. Not Dad, not my aunt. Not even my cousin, who I used to share a bedroom with every Thanksgiving growing up. Not Mom. Especially not Mom. And somehow that hurt more than the words did. More than the will. More than Jason's smirk or Dad's hard voice or any of it. Because words can be explained away. Words can be walked back. People say things in the heat of the moment, and then they come outside and they stand by your car and they say, "Emma, wait, let's talk." But no one came. The porch light was just off. I drove home in complete silence. No music. I usually always have something playing. A podcast, a playlist, anything. But tonight I couldn't stand the idea of noise. I just drove. Both hands on the wheel, eyes on the road, breathing slow and uneven and tight in my chest. My apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building in a quiet part of town. I'd lived there for 4 years. I liked it because it felt like mine. I had picked everything in it. The second-hand couch I reupholstered myself. The plants on the windowsill that I kept alive through 2 harsh winters. The photos on the wall that I had chosen carefully because every single one of them made me feel something good. But when I walked in that night, the place felt smaller, quieter in the wrong way. I dropped my keys on the little table by the door and just stood there in the entryway. Coat still on, purse still on my shoulder, like I wasn't sure I was actually staying. After a minute, I walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, stood there staring at the shelves without seeing anything, then closed it. I wasn't hungry. I went to the bathroom. I don't know why. Habit, maybe. I turned on the light and stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself. My makeup was still mostly intact. My hair was still in place. I looked completely normal from the outside, like someone who'd just come home from an ordinary dinner. "You're fine," I whispered to my reflection. My voice sounded unconvincing even to me. My lips pressed together. My eyes filled up fast, the way they do when you've been holding something back for too long, and then suddenly there's no reason to hold it anymore. And then it hit. All at once. The tears came hard and ugly and loud. Not the soft kind, the kind that hurt your chest. The kind where you're not even fully sure what you're crying about anymore because it stopped being about just one thing a long time ago. I slid down the wall next to the sink and sat on the cold bathroom floor and cried into my hands like I was 10 years old. Because that's exactly what it felt like. Like being the kid at school who doesn't get picked for the team. Except this wasn't school. This wasn't a team. This was my family. The people who were supposed to pick me first, always, no matter what. And they had looked me in the eye and chosen someone else. Again. I don't know how long I sat there. A while. Long enough for my back to ache and my eyes to go puffy and my breathing to finally, slowly, level out. Jason's voice kept coming back. "You were never the favorite." I turned it over in my head like a stone, examining it from every angle. Was he right? Had I spent my whole life trying to earn something that was never actually available to me? Had I been working toward a finish line that didn't exist? And the harder question, the one I had never let myself ask out loud before, had I just been tolerated? Memories started surfacing, small ones, the kind you file away and label as nothing because looking at them directly feels too uncomfortable. My 25th birthday. Mom gave me a gift card to a store I'd never shopped at. Generic, like something you grab when you forgot. That same year, she threw Jason a surprise party with a custom cake and his childhood photos printed on a banner. The way she looked at him when he walked into a room. Like something in her lit up. And the way she looked at me. A nod. A small smile. Present but not lit. The June I graduated college. A Friday afternoon ceremony. Dad said he had a work conflict. Couldn't make it. 3 weeks later, he drove 6 hours to watch Jason's rec league baseball championship. A recreational baseball game. I had buried all of it. I was good at that. I had spent years getting good at that. Taking those small, painful moments and pressing them down flat and sliding them somewhere I didn't have to look at them. But now they were all coming back up at once, rising like water. And for the first time, I let myself sit with the question I had spent my whole life running from. Why? Why was I always second? Why did they choose him every single time without fail, like it wasn't even a decision worth thinking about? What did he have that I didn't? What did I do wrong? And if you've ever asked yourself that question about someone who is supposed to love you without conditions, you know it doesn't leave you alone. You know it follows you from the bathroom floor to the bedroom to the ceiling you stare at when sleep won't come. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on top of my covers, still in my clothes from dinner, and I stared at the ceiling. And somewhere around 3 in the morning, something shifted in me. Not healing, not forgiveness, not peace. Something quieter than that. A small, stubborn thought. Maybe the story I've been telling myself about my family isn't the whole story. And I needed to find out what was. Looking back, the signs were always there. I just didn't want to see them. That's the thing about growing up inside something. You don't question it because it's all you know. The patterns just feel like life. You think every family has a thermostat that runs a little cold in certain rooms. You think everyone has a brother who gets the longer explanation and a sister who gets the shorter one. You normalize it because the alternative, believing it means something, is too heavy to carry when you're young. But I wasn't young anymore. And lying there in the dark, I let myself finally look at it clearly. Jason was never just the favorite. He was protected. There's a difference. A favorite gets more attention, more affection, maybe more of the good stuff at the dinner table. But protected is something else. Protected means the rules bend around you. Protected means consequences find a different direction when they're headed your way. When Jason was 19, he took Dad's car without asking. Came home at 2 in the morning with a crumpled front bumper and a story that didn't fully add up. Dad looked at the car, looked at Jason, and said quietly, "We'll get it fixed. Don't do it again." That was it. A mistake. When I was 22 and got a parking ticket outside the library during finals week, it became a 40-minute conversation about personal responsibility, planning ahead, and not expecting other people to solve my problems. A parking ticket. When Jason dropped out of college after his second year, Dad sat him down and said, "Take your time, figure out what you want." Then he set up a small fund for Jason to explore his options. That fund paid for 3 different business ideas over 4 years. All 3 failed. Quietly. And the fund just refilled. When I was putting myself through school working double shifts at a diner on weekends and a copy center on weekday evenings, nobody at that dinner table ever once said, "Emma, do you need help?" Not once. And I told myself it was because I hadn't asked. I told myself I was independent, strong. But the truth was simpler and harder. Nobody offered because nobody thought to. I wasn't in the part of their mind where worry lived. I told myself for years that this was normal, that families have favorites and it doesn't mean anything deep. It's just personalities, chemistry, the way things shake out. But there was something else, something I had noticed as a kid and never fully let myself think about. Jason didn't look like us. Dad had dark brown eyes. I had dark brown eyes. My aunt, Dad's sister, same thing. It was like a family stamp. Strong brow, dark eyes, a certain shape to the jaw. Jason had light eyes, greenish-gray, a softer face, different build entirely. As a kid, I thought it was just one of those genetic things, a throwback to someone further back in the family tree. I remembered asking Mom about it once, maybe when I was 9 or 10. She laughed it off immediately. "Don't be silly, Emma, he just looks like my side." So I let it go. I stopped asking. Kids do that. They ask once, they get a firm answer, and they learn that the question isn't welcome. So they put it away. But now, lying in my apartment at 3 in the morning, with everything from that dinner still raw and sharp in my chest, the memory felt different. Louder. like it was trying to tell me something it had been holding on to for a long time. And then another memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought about in years. I was 16. It was a school night. I came home late from a study group, maybe 10:30, and the house was quiet except for the light under my parents' bedroom door and the sound of voices inside. I almost walked past, but something in Mom's voice stopped me. It was sharp and stressed in a way I didn't hear often. "We can't keep lying forever, Richard." I stood in the hallway, completely still. Dad's voice came back low and clipped. "It's done. We agreed. Don't bring it up again." A pause. Then silence. I went to my room and lay in bed and told myself it was probably about money. Or something with the house. Adults had complicated conversations. It wasn't my business. I didn't let myself think about it again. Until now. We can't keep lying forever. What were they lying about? I pressed my palms against my eyes in the dark. I had spent my entire life believing the problem was me. That if I worked harder, did better, needed less, asked for less, that eventually the warmth would even out. That eventually they would look at me the way they looked at him. But what if it wasn't about me at all? What if there was a reason? Not an excuse, not something that made it okay, but a reason. Something underneath all of it that explained why Jason was protected and I was overlooked. Why the rules were different. Why he was chosen in ways that went beyond personality or preference. I didn't have an answer yet, but for the first time I was asking the right question. And that felt like the beginning of something. I just didn't know yet how much it was going to cost me to find out. For 2 full days, I did nothing. No calls, no texts. I let their messages go to voicemail without listening to them. I didn't check the family group chat. I turned my phone face down on the kitchen counter and walked away from it like it was something that could hurt me. Part of me just wanted to let it all go. Seriously. I sat with that option. Laid it out in front of me like a map and looked at it honestly. Walk away. Cut the thread. Build something new and clean without any of them in it. People do that. People leave families that don't choose them and they go on to build beautiful lives. I had a job I was good at. I had a few real friends. I had my apartment with my plants and my secondhand couch and a life that was genuinely mine. I could just continue it without them. That option was simple, cleaner than the alternative. It would hurt for a while, and then it would scar over and I would be okay. I almost chose it. But something kept bothering me, and it wasn't the money. I want to be honest about that because it would be easy to assume. People hear will and they think greed. But I had survived without their money my entire adult life. I didn't need it. I wasn't sitting in my apartment doing math about inheritance. It was the truth. That's what I couldn't let go of. Because there was something underneath all of this. I could feel it the way you feel weather changing before it actually changes. A pressure in the air. Something just below the surface that I had been circling my whole life without ever getting close enough to see it clearly. We can't keep lying forever. That sentence lived in me now. I couldn't evict it. On the 3rd day, I got in my car. I told myself I was just driving, getting air, clearing my head, but I knew where I was going before I left the parking garage. I ended up on their street around 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, parked across from the house, 1 car length back, like I was trying not to be seen even though I was sitting in plain sight. The house looked the same as always, brick front, 2 flower beds that Mom kept neat from April through October. The basketball hoop in the driveway that Jason used to use and nobody had taken down even though he hadn't lived there in years. Jason's car wasn't there. Only Mom's silver sedan sat in the driveway. I watched the house for a long time. My phone buzzed. I looked down. A text from a friend asking about weekend plans. I put it back face down. I kept watching. I don't know what I was waiting for. Permission, maybe. Some sign that it was okay to go in. Some signal that the thing I was feeling in my chest was real and worth following. Nothing came. So I made the decision myself. I got out of the car. The walkway to the front door felt longer than usual. Every step deliberate. My hands were steady this time, but my heart was doing something complicated behind my ribs. I knocked. The sound felt too loud in the quiet afternoon. I waited. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. No footsteps inside. No shadow behind the frosted glass panel beside the door. Nothing. I stood there for a second. I should have left. Any reasonable version of this situation ended with me getting back in my car and driving home. Instead, I reached out and tried the handle. It turned. The door opened. I stood in the doorway for a moment, half in, half out. "Mom?" I called into the house. My voice bounced off the entryway walls and came back to me unanswered. I stepped inside. The house smelled like it always did. Something clean and faintly like the candles Mom kept on the side table. The same lamp was on in the living room, the one with the cream shade she'd had for 15 years. Everything exactly in its place. But it felt hollow with no one in it. I moved slowly, not snooping. Not yet. Just walking through a house I grew up in, trying to figure out why it felt so foreign now. Then I walked toward Dad's office at the end of the hall. The door was pushed halfway open. I stopped in the doorway. The desk was the same heavy oak one he'd had since I was a child, organized the way he always kept it, papers in neat stacks, pens in the cup on the right side, the old desk lamp with the green glass shade, and in the center of the desk, a folder, half open, sitting like it had been looked at recently and set down in a hurry. I could see the tab on the folder from where I stood, Jason's name. I stood very still. My brain ran through the sensible options quickly. Close the door, go home, this isn't yours to know. But my feet didn't move toward the exit. They moved toward the desk. And if you've ever stood at the edge of something that you know will change everything, something that you can feel radiating heat from 3 feet away, you know how hard it is to make yourself walk away. You know that sometimes you can't. My hand hovered over the folder. One breath, then I opened it. The first thing I saw was a stack of papers clipped together on the left side of the folder. Legal documents. The kind with tiny print and official letterheads and notary stamps in the corners. I recognized some of the language from paperwork I'd handled at work over the years. Estate stuff. Asset transfer language. I skimmed it quickly. Jason's name appeared over and over. That wasn't the thing that stopped me. I turned to the right side of the folder. Medical forms. Several of them. And beneath those, a single white envelope that had already been opened, the flap torn unevenly like someone had opened it fast, maybe with shaking hands. I pulled the paper out of the envelope slowly. It was a lab report. The kind with a clean, clinical header at the top, black font, date stamped, a reference number in the corner, and 2 names, Richard Carter, Jason Carter. I frowned at it. My brain tried to arrange it into something that made sense. Then I saw the result line. Probability of biological relationship, 0%. I read it again, 0. My breath caught somewhere in my throat and just stayed there. I turned the page. Another test. Different date, same names, same result. I kept flipping. 3 tests total. All of them dated within the past 2 years, like someone had needed to be absolutely sure. Like one answer wasn't enough. Every single one said the same thing. Jason Carter was not biologically related to Richard Carter. Not even close. 0%. The folder slipped slightly in my hands and I gripped it tighter. My brain was moving fast, but also strangely slow at the same time. The way it does when you're processing something too big to take in all at once. Why would they have these? Why 3 of them? And why was Jason getting everything if he wasn't even... A sound behind me. Footsteps on hardwood. Soft but clear. I spun around so fast I nearly knocked the desk lamp over. Standing in the doorway of the office was a woman I'd known my entire life. Mrs. Patricia Carter. No relation despite the shared last name. She lived next door and had for as long as I could remember. She used to babysit Jason and me when we were young. She knew where the spare key was kept because Mom had given it to her years ago for emergencies. She was in her late 60s now, silver-haired, wearing a light cardigan, and she was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not surprise, something closer to dread. "Emma?" Her voice was careful, quiet. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see Mom." My voice came out steadier than I expected. The door was unlocked. Her eyes dropped to the folder in my hands, to the papers, to the lab report still facing outward. Something moved across her face. Recognition. And then something heavier than that. "You weren't supposed to find that," she said softly. The words landed in the room like something dropped from a height. I looked at her directly. "You knew." It wasn't a question. She didn't answer right away. She stepped into the office slowly, like she was deciding something with every step. Then she stopped near the chair in the corner and stood there, hands clasped in front of her. "How long?" I asked. She exhaled slowly through her nose, the sound of someone releasing a breath they'd been holding for years. "A long time," she said. "Then why didn't anyone tell me?" She looked at me with tired eyes, the kind of tired that isn't about sleep. "Because your mother made a choice," she said carefully, "and your father agreed to live with it. They decided together that the family would stay intact, that no one outside would know." "Know what exactly?" My voice was tight. "That Jason isn't Dad's son?" She didn't flinch, which told me everything. "Yes," she said. The room felt like it tilted slightly, just a degree, just enough to feel wrong. "So who is his father?" She shook her head once. "That's not my place to say." "You're already in the middle of it, Mrs. Carter." She looked at the floor for a moment, then back at me. "Someone your mother knew before she and your father were married," she said finally. "It was over before it started, but then she found out she was pregnant. And your father, he already knew she was expecting. He assumed it was his." I stood very still, processing. She never told him the truth? Mrs. Carter paused. "She told him eventually," she said, "after Jason was born, when it became harder to pretend. And he stayed. He stayed." I set the folder down on the desk, gently, like it was fragile. "So Jason doesn't know any of this?" "No," she said quietly. "He never has." I turned that over in my mind. Jason, confident, smirking, entitled Jason, who had sailed through life on a current of protection and preference that neither he nor I had ever fully understood. He didn't know. He genuinely believed he was Richard Carter's son. He had no idea that the foundation everything was built on was made of something else entirely. And my parents had spent 35 years making sure he never found out, at the expense of everything else, at the expense of me. Because now I understood something I hadn't before: the guilt, the favoritism, the bending of rules and the extending of grace, and the endless quiet protection. It wasn't because Jason was better. It wasn't because I was unstable or irresponsible or difficult. It was because they were hiding something. And Jason was the thing they were hiding. Every choice they made around him, every time they softened consequences or shielded him or chose his side without question. It wasn't love in the simple, uncomplicated sense. It was management. It was two people trying to hold a secret in place for 35 years by treating the secret like a priority. And I was the one who paid for it. Not because I deserved it, because I was the one who didn't need to be managed. I was just their actual daughter. And that, apparently, was the less complicated thing to have. Mrs. Carter was still watching me. "Emma," she said softly, "I'm sorry you found out this way." I looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not," I said, and I meant it. I thought finding the truth would make me feel powerful. I had this image in my head on the drive home, this idea of myself as someone who finally had the full picture, someone who could now see the whole board clearly after years of only seeing part of it. I thought it would feel like winning. It didn't. It felt like the floor had been replaced with something that looked exactly the same, but couldn't hold my weight anymore. I got home and sat on my bed and stared at nothing for a long time. The DNA papers weren't with me. I hadn't taken them. I didn't need the paper. The information was already inside me now, and it wasn't going anywhere. I kept turning one thought over and over. They knew. Not just Mom, both of them. Dad had known for years, maybe decades, that Jason was not his biological son, and he had looked at that truth square in the face and then turned around and given Jason everything. His name, his protection, his estate, his preference, and he had done it knowingly. That was the part I couldn't absorb. If Dad hadn't known, it would have been painful, but I could have framed it differently. Mom made a choice in secret, and Dad was a victim of it just like me. That would have been a story I could hold. But he knew. He sat across from me at every dinner table for 32 years knowing. He skipped my graduation knowing. He sighed at me like I was the problem at that dinner last week knowing. He said the words, "We've decided everything goes to Jason, he's more responsible," knowing the full truth of what he was doing. He chose the secret over me, deliberately, consciously, over and over and over again. I pressed my palms flat against my thighs and focused on breathing. It took a while. The tears came again, but differently this time. Not the ugly, desperate kind from the bathroom floor 2 nights ago. These were quieter, slower. The kind that come when something is just genuinely, deeply sad, and your body needs to acknowledge that before you can move forward. I let them come. I didn't fight them. I cried for the graduation Dad missed. I cried for the birthday gifts that felt like afterthoughts. I cried for every time I tried harder, worked harder, needed less, asked for less, made myself smaller and more convenient and easier to be around, thinking that eventually the love would balance out. I cried for the version of me that spent 32 years believing the problem was her, because that girl deserved better than that. She deserved someone to tell her early, "You are not the problem. You have never been the problem." There is something happening here that has nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with other people's fear. Nobody told her that, so she just kept trying. I wiped my face with the back of my hand and sat up straighter. Okay. I understood now why Jason was protected. I understood the machinery underneath the favoritism. The guilt driving my mother's choices. The silent agreement my father had made with himself to hold the family structure in place no matter what it cost. I understood all of it, and understanding it didn't make it okay. But it did something important. It moved the weight off me. For the first time in my life, I could see clearly that this was never about my value, never about my worth, never about whether I was enough. It was about a secret 2 people needed to keep, and I was just the one who didn't need to be kept. I almost tore those papers apart in my head. I imagined doing it, just shredding the whole thing and walking away, leaving them to their carefully constructed world and their secrets and their guilt-driven decisions and just disappearing from all of it. Almost. But something else was growing now in the space where the tears had been. It was calm, quiet, but firm. Clarity. Not anger. Anger burns hot and fast and makes you sloppy. This wasn't that. This was something more like standing up very straight after being hunched over for a long time. The kind of straightening that stretches muscles you forgot you had. They had made their choices for 35 years. Now I was going to make mine. And I was only going to make it once, so I needed to do it right. I didn't go to them the next day, or the day after that. I waited. Patience was something I had learned the hard way over the years. When you grow up having to earn everything yourself, when nobody hands you the softer path, you learn how to hold still, how to watch, how to choose your moment instead of just reacting to everyone else's. That skill was about to matter more than it ever had before. 6 days after I found the folder in Dad's office, my phone rang. Dad. I let it ring twice. Then I picked up. Emma. His voice was measured, careful. The voice he used when he wanted to sound neutral. Dad. We're having the family together again next Saturday, to finalize everything with the attorney. A pause. I think you should be there. I found that interesting. A week ago, I was cut out of the will and told I was unstable. Now he wanted me present for the legal finalization. Something had shifted in him. I wasn't sure what. Maybe Mrs. Carter had said something. Maybe Mom had. Maybe he just felt the loose thread of me out there and wanted it tied up neatly where he could see it. I'll be there, I said. Simple. No emotion in my voice, no edge. Good. Another pause. And Emma, let's keep things calm this time. Of course, I said. I hung up. Then I sat quietly for a moment with my phone in my lap. Calm. He wanted calm. I could do calm. Saturday came gray and cool. One of those late fall mornings where the sky is flat and white and the air smells like something ending. I got dressed carefully, not to impress, not to perform. I wore something simple and dark, and I kept my hair straight, and I put on the kind of quiet, settled energy that says, I know exactly where I am and why I'm here. I arrived before anyone else. Mom opened the door. She looked at me for a moment with something complicated behind her eyes. Not guilt, exactly. Not quite apology. More like a person bracing for something they can feel coming but can't name yet. Emma, she said. Mom. I smiled, small, controlled. Can I come in? She stepped back and let me through. The dining room had been rearranged slightly. The long table had been cleared of the usual centerpiece and set up more formally. Papers stacked neatly at one end. 2 chairs positioned for the attorney and whoever was presenting documents. Water glasses set out. It looked official. It looked final. I sat down at the far end of the table and waited. Dad came in from the kitchen. He saw me and gave a short nod. I nodded back. Nobody said anything meaningful. We were all just moving through the motions of the pre-conversation, the polite surface behavior that families use to get through rooms when the air between them is complicated. 20 minutes later, Jason arrived. He came through the front door with his jacket half unzipped and that easy stride he'd always had. The walk of someone who had never once in his life entered a room worried about his reception. He saw me and slowed slightly. Then the smile came back, easier than it should have been. "Back for another scene?" he said, light, casual, like we were old friends who'd had a minor disagreement. I looked at him. "Something like that," I said. He held my gaze for a second. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not concern, just a small recalibration, like he was deciding how seriously to take me. He decided not very seriously. He sat down across the table and reached for the water. The attorney arrived 10 minutes later. A trim man in his 50s named Gerald Walsh, someone the family had used for years. He set up his briefcase efficiently, laid out the documents, uncapped his pen, and looked around the table with the practiced composure of a man who had presided over many difficult family moments. Dad cleared his throat. "All right," he said, "we're here to finalize the estate documents and—" Before that, my voice came out even, steady, almost soft, but it landed in the room like something solid. Every head at the table turned toward me. Mom's hands, resting on the table, went very still. Dad blinked once. Jason looked mildly amused, like he was waiting for a small inconvenience to pass. The attorney looked between us carefully. "I just have one question," I said. The silence in the room was complete. I reached into the bag beside my chair. I had gone back to the house 2 days after finding the folder. Mom hadn't been home then either. The folder was still on the desk, reorganized, closed, but still there. I had taken photographs of every page on my phone, clear ones. Then I had those photographs printed at the copy center downtown on plain white paper. I set the small stack of papers on the table in front of me, face down. "Before we talk about any of this," I said, looking at the attorney and then at my father, "I think there's some information the room should have." Dad's jaw tightened. Mom had gone pale. Not the pale of someone who is cold, the pale of someone who has just seen something they buried a long time ago, walking back through the door. Jason frowned. He leaned forward slightly, trying to read the room, trying to figure out why the energy had shifted so completely in 30 seconds. He couldn't figure it out. He didn't know yet what I had. He didn't know that the ground he was standing on had a fault line running through the middle of it, and I was the only one in the room who knew exactly where it ran. I placed my hand flat on top of the papers, and the air changed. Everyone felt it. I didn't make a speech. I didn't stand up dramatically or raise my voice or point fingers across the table. I just slid the papers forward, slow and deliberate. The way you set something down when you want everyone in the room to understand that you are completely in control of yourself. The stack of printed pages moved across the table surface and stopped in the middle where everyone could reach them. Nobody moved for a second. Then Jason reached out and picked them up. I watched his eyes move across the first page. Quick at first, the way you read something you expect to be boring or irrelevant. His expression was still carrying that mild amusement from earlier, that baseline confidence he walked through every room wearing. Then his eyes slowed down. His brow pulled together slightly. He turned to the second page. The amusement was gone now. In its place was something I had never seen on Jason's face before in my entire life. Confusion. Real confusion. The kind that doesn't perform itself. The kind that happens when your brain receives information it has no existing folder for. He turned to the third page, the lab report. I watched him read the result line. I saw the exact moment it landed. His jaw went slack. Just slightly. Just enough. He set the papers down on the table slowly, the way you set something down when your hands have stopped feeling reliable. "What is this?" His voice came out wrong, too flat, like the volume control had been turned down without his permission. Nobody answered. Mom was staring at the center of the table, not at the papers, not at Jason, at nothing. Her hands were in her lap now, and I could see from where I sat that they were shaking. Dad had not moved, had not looked up. His eyes were fixed on a point on the table somewhere past the papers, and his face had the particular stillness of a man who has been dreading a specific moment for a very long time and has now watched it arrive. Jason looked at Dad. Dad. One word. And everything in that one word. Dad didn't answer, he didn't look up. That silence was its own kind of answer, and the whole room understood it. "This is fake," Jason said. His voice had an edge to it now, defensive. The tone of someone trying to push back against something their body already believes. "This is obviously fake. Where did you even get this?" He looked at me. I said nothing. I didn't need to. "Dad," Jason's voice went up slightly, not loud, just tighter. "Tell me this is fake." Dad exhaled through his nose. Long, slow. The breath of a man releasing something he has carried for decades. He didn't say it was fake. The attorney shifted quietly in his seat. He had gone very still in the professional way of someone who is witnessing something deeply private and is trying to take up as little space as possible. Jason stood up, not aggressively, more like he needed to be vertical, like sitting felt suddenly wrong, too exposed, too low to the ground. He picked up the papers again, looked at the names. Richard Carter, Jason Carter, looked at the result, put them back down. "Mom." His voice broke on that one syllable, just fractured right down the middle. And that was the thing that got me. Even in that moment, even with everything between us and everything that table had held over the years, that sound got into me somewhere. Because whatever Jason was, whatever role he had unknowingly played in my life, he was also a person who had just had the ground disappear under him with no warning. I knew what that felt like. Mom broke. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a sob or a wail. It was quiet and sudden, the way a dam goes. Her face crumpled and she pressed one hand over her mouth, and tears came fast and silent down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. That was it, just those two words. But they confirmed everything the DNA test had already said. Jason took one step back from the table, then another, like he was physically trying to create distance between himself and what was happening in that room. "So He stopped, started again. "What exactly am I? What does this mean?" He was looking at Dad now, directly. And there was something raw and young in his face that I had never seen before. Something underneath all the confidence and the ease and the entitlement that had always been there. Something that looked exactly like fear. Dad finally looked up. His eyes were dry, but they were heavy. The eyes of someone who has made peace with a decision long ago and is now watching the cost of it walk around the room. "I knew," Dad said quietly. 3 words. Jason froze. "You knew." Jason repeated it back like he was checking whether the words made sense in his mouth. "You knew, and you just, what, stayed?" "I stayed," Dad said, "for the family." The room was completely silent. The attorney had his pen flat on the table and was not touching it. Jason laughed. It came out broken and short. The kind of laugh that has nothing to do with anything being funny. The kind that comes out when your body doesn't know what else to do with what it's feeling. "For the family," Jason repeated. His voice had gone hollow. "So I'm what, then? The family secret you decided to keep?" Nobody answered, and that silence was worse than any answer could have been. I watched Jason's face cycle through things I had no names for. Disbelief cycling into something that looked like grief, cycling into something that looked like anger, cycling back into disbelief again. The confidence was completely gone. The smirk was gone. The easy slouch, the relaxed posture, the sense of someone who had always known exactly where he stood and how much he was worth in every room he entered. All of it. Gone. And what was left underneath looked exactly like what I had felt walking out of this house a week and a half ago. Lost. Completely, genuinely lost. For the first time in my life, I was watching Jason Carter feel something I recognized. I didn't feel satisfaction exactly. I want to be honest about that because it would be easy to say I did. It would make a cleaner story. The wronged sister finally watching the golden son get what was coming to him. But it wasn't that. It was more complicated than that. What I felt was a strange, heavy kind of recognition. The understanding that the same people who had done something to me had also, in a different way, done something to him. They had built his entire identity on a foundation they controlled. They had made him the favorite not purely out of love, but out of fear and guilt and the need to keep something hidden. And he had never known. He had lived his whole life as the answer to a question he didn't know had been asked. Jason picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. His movements were different now, slower, like he was relearning how to operate his own body. He looked at Mom. She was still crying quietly, hands still over her mouth. He looked at Dad. Dad held his gaze this time but said nothing more. Then Jason looked at me. I don't know what he expected to see. Triumph, maybe, or satisfaction, or the mirror image of every smug expression he had ever aimed in my direction. But I just looked back at him, steady, quiet, and something passed between us in that moment that I don't have a perfect word for. Not forgiveness, not alliance, not understanding exactly, just recognition. Two people who had both been shaped by the same secret in completely different ways. He looked away first. He walked out of the dining room without another word. I heard his footsteps in the hallway, heard the front door open, heard it close. Not slam, just close. The room held what remained. Mom crying softly, Dad staring at the table, the attorney sitting very still with his hands folded and his documents untouched. The will unsigned, the estate unfinalized. Everything that had been arranged so carefully for this morning, sitting undone in the middle of the table like a puzzle that had been tipped over. I sat for another moment, just breathed. Then I picked up my bag, pushed my chair back gently, stood up. Dad looked at me. I held his gaze for a few seconds. I didn't say anything angry. I didn't deliver a speech. I didn't list everything I deserved, or everything they had taken, or everything I had spent 32 years trying to earn from people who were too consumed by their own fears to give it. I didn't need to. The room had already said everything. I just nodded once, small, final. And then I walked out. The air outside was cold and clean. That was the first thing I noticed. After the stuffed, heavy silence of that dining room, the outside air felt like something I could actually breathe. I stood on the front step for just a moment and pulled it in. Deep. Slow. No shaking hands this time. No tears pressing behind my eyes. No heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Just quiet. I walked to my car, unlocked it, got in, sat for a second with my hands in my lap instead of on the wheel. Through the windshield, the neighborhood looked ordinary. A man walking a dog 2 houses down, leaves on the sidewalk, a kid on a bicycle at the far end of the street. Normal life moving forward at its regular pace, completely unaware of what had just happened inside that brick house with the flower beds and the old basketball hoop. I started the engine and drove home. No music again. But this time the silence felt different. Not the hollow, echoing silence of that first night after dinner, when I sat in the parking lot outside their house and waited for someone to come out. This silence felt chosen, mine. When I got back to my apartment, I changed out of my careful dark outfit and put on an old sweatshirt and made coffee and stood at my kitchen window looking out at the street below. Just standing there, holding the warm mug with both hands. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, my mind was quiet. Not numb, not shut down, not the forced quiet of someone suppressing things, actually quiet, like a room after the noise finally stops and you realize how loud it had been all along. I thought about Jason. I wondered where he had driven after he left, whether he went home or just drove, the way I had driven that first night. Whether he was sitting somewhere right now trying to rearrange everything he thought he knew about himself into something that made sense with this new information. I hoped he found something solid to land on. I genuinely did. Not because he deserved my concern, especially after everything, but because I knew what it felt like to have the story you believed about yourself turn out to be missing pages. And I wouldn't wish that feeling on someone I hated, let alone someone I had grown up alongside, however complicated that growing up had been. I thought about Mom. Her face when the papers hit the table. The way she broke quietly, hand over her mouth, tears coming fast. 35 years she had carried that. 35 years of managing and compensating and protecting a secret that was always going to eventually be too heavy to keep. I didn't feel sorry for her exactly. Not yet. Maybe eventually. Maybe in a year or two when some distance had settled between us, and I had done enough of my own work to approach her story with more generosity than I could manage right now. But I understood her more than I had a week ago. Understanding isn't forgiveness. I want to be clear about that. You can understand exactly why someone did something and still know that it caused damage that was real and lasting. Those two things can exist at the same time. And I thought about Dad. Quiet, controlled, carefully neutral Dad, who had known the truth for most of Jason's life and chosen to hold the family structure in place around it, regardless of what that cost me. That one was harder. Because Mom's secret had a messy human origin, a mistake made before truth was told, before choices solidified. But Dad's decision was made with full information. He knew. He looked at the whole picture and he decided that maintaining the architecture of the family was more important than making sure I was treated fairly within it. That was going to take longer to find a place for. Maybe a long time. Maybe that was okay. 9 days after the meeting at the house, Gerald Walsh, the attorney, called me. I was at work, sitting at my desk with a coffee going cold to my left and a report open on my screen. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I picked up. "Miss Carter," he said. His voice was professional but not unkind. "I wanted to let you know that there have been some developments regarding the estate. Your parents have asked me to reach out. They'd like to revisit the terms of the will, potentially to include—" "Mr. Walsh," I said. "Yes?" "Tell them thank you." A pause. "And tell them I'm not interested." Another pause. Longer this time. "Are you certain?" "Yes," I said. "I'm certain." I put the phone down and sat for a moment. Then I turned back to my report, and I almost laughed. Not the confused, desperate laugh from that first dinner. Something lighter than that. The laugh of someone who has been carrying extra weight for a very long time, and has finally, genuinely set it down. Keep it. Keep all of it. The money, the house, the name on the documents, the estate, all of it. I didn't need any of it to know who I was. I didn't need to be written into their paperwork to have value. I didn't need a line in a legal document to prove that my life was worth something. My life had been worth something this whole time. I had just been looking for the proof in the wrong places. That's the thing nobody tells you when you grow up in a family that makes you feel like the one who doesn't quite fit. You spend so much energy trying to earn your place at a table that was never actually set for you. You try harder and need less and make yourself smaller and more convenient. You tell yourself that if you can just become the right version of yourself, patient enough, successful enough, easy enough to love, then finally the warmth will come. But it doesn't work that way. Because the warmth you're looking for isn't something they're withholding until you qualify. It was never theirs to give. What you actually needed was already inside you. It had been there the whole time, underneath all the trying and the shrinking and the waiting. You just had to stop looking at them long enough to find it in yourself. I'm not going to tell you I have it all figured out now. That would be a lie, and you deserve better than a clean ending that isn't real. There are still mornings when something catches me off guard. A smell, a song, the particular quality of light in November that reminds me of family dinners growing up, back when I still believed we were a normal family, back before I knew what was underneath. There are still days when the old question surfaces, quiet and uninvited. Why wasn't I enough? And I sit with it now instead of running from it, and then I answer it. Not with anger, not with the story about the will or the DNA test or the dinner where everything cracked open. Just with the simple truth that took me 32 years to reach. You were always enough. That was never the question. The question was whether they were capable of showing you that. And they weren't. Not fully, not consistently, not in the ways that mattered most. And that is about them. It always was. I still have my apartment. My plants on the windowsill made it through another fall. The secondhand couch still holds up. The photos on my walls still make me feel something good when I look at them. My life is still mine. Completely, quietly, solidly mine. And if you've made it to the end of this story because some part of it lives in you too, if you've been the one at the table who felt invisible, the one who worked twice as hard for half the recognition, the one who kept asking why without ever getting a real answer, then hear this. You are not the problem that needs solving. You never were. Sometimes the family you were born into cannot give you the thing you most need from them. And the bravest thing you will ever do is stop waiting for them to change their minds and start building something true for yourself, on your own ground, where no one gets to decide your worth but you. If this story reached something in you that you don't usually talk about, you're not alone. More stories like this every week. Follow along. The next one might be the one that changes something.